The Front Row Back Row podcast is a show where two grad school buddies discuss physical therapy entrepreneurship. I helped guide a company to an 8-figure exit, and I'm now starting my own mobile company. Brian grew his mobile practice to 4 clinics, and he's now doing $1 million in revenue. Join us as we help you grow your own business. Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. My name is Dr. Owen Campbell, owner of Simplify Motion PT in Phoenix, Arizona. And with me as always is Dr. Brian Wolf, owner of Evolution Physical Therapy in Connecticut and Long Island. And together we form PhysioGrowth. It is a consulting company that allows you to take your practice to the next level. Now, longtime listeners of the show will realize that I am terrible at ad reads. So I am going to give this over to Brian to bring it home.
I feel like I love it when you say we together we are PhysioGrowth. I feel like something out of like, Planet Earth or Captain
Planet. He's our hero.
There you go. He's our hero. That's what I feel like. Nice. So for those of you, if you want to be Captain Planet and be ready to lead in the PT industry, PhysioGrowth mentors physical therapists to master the business side of care. Start building the practice of your dreams at school.com/physiogrowth-mentorship-group today.
All right, there we go. All right, and now the topic we're going to talk about today really is an interesting one, and it kind of strikes at the core of our group, right? Our PhysioGrowth mentorship, mastermind group, really is the difference between a solopreneur who's working and trying to just get a much better job than they could get working in like corporate PT or just for somebody else, really. The difference between that solopreneur and then building your business as that versus if you're really trying to build an asset. So today I want to discuss kind of the differences between it. Now, both are great, right? And I mean, there are definitely pluses and minuses to both sides. But for anybody either just beginning the entrepreneurial journey or someone, honestly, we got a few of our mastermind members who've been in it for a while, that these are pretty key questions you have to ask yourself when you're opening a business of like, what's my goal? Because it can affect even like the beginning decision making sometimes. So that's going to be the topic of what we're talking about today. And I know, Brian, you kind of did both of these things, right? You started as a solopreneur, table out of the back of your car, going to people's homes, and now you run 5 clinics, 2 million in revenue, blah, blah, blah. It basically just, I think you said today you had one of your favorite, actually had some time on your hands and still realized, oh my God, we're going to see like a few hundred visits today and I don't have to see a single one of them. You've walked this path.
It's good. I think, and I was telling Owen, I was like, today's just one of those days where like some appointments, the way it kind of, and again, like, it's not like I didn't work. I today and doing other stuff, but they kind of lightened up a little bit where I was like, it's funny. I just remember the days where, I was seeing patients at 5 a.m. and grinding until 7 p.m. Like I remember those days when I was doing it solo. So the grind
you didn't work at all. You're just trying to make it sound.
Yeah. I wish that's what I could tell you. In terms of the 8 to 10 year journey, kind of around with doing this, I think a lot of it's very interesting. And so what I was talking to Owen about was, someone had asked in a group, and Owen was a part of it, asked about like how to sell their business, how to sell what they were doing. And I think it's an interesting business. I think it's an interesting thing because I think it's something like 85% of businesses won't be sold at some point, meaning that not only that's and of the ones that'll survive. So that means that the majority of businesses, think about this, the majority of businesses, so like 85% of businesses won't actually, and I'll look this statistic up specifically so I know it. But it's like the majority of businesses won't even make it after a year or two. And then secondly is the vast majority will never actually even be sold. So the reality of that is
family run or
maybe, or they'll just pack retire. It in, right? I know of a business that was a really great business. My family had a great business to the point where they just basically packed it in. They owned the building, they did some other stuff, blah, blah, but they just sold the trucks and that was it. So like there was no like big sale of the business at the end of it, right? So and
I think that's important context because I think a lot of people see Shark Tank, right?
Yes.
And they think, well, obviously, once I'm making a bunch of money, I can sell my business for a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to understand that, there's another person on the end of that deal, right? And they want something for their money. So like to bring Brian's point back, this particular question that I've seen in other places, but particularly recently, this person built a great, practice, one person in the practice, great name, good therapist, all that stuff. And it almost seemed as though they were shocked that, pretty much they weren't going to get anything more than maybe 1 year EBITDA. And that's only if they worked in the business. Right.
Yeah.
So, basically they just had a job. That's all it was. And most of the people who had any sort of, business experience we're basically saying, look, it's kind of worthless if you can't step away from the business and it works itself, right? And the best example I thought of was like, would you buy a house if you had to hold the roof up the entire time? Like,
Yeah.
or somebody had to hold the roof up the entire time? No, you wouldn't, because you'd be paying for that guy to hold the roof up. You got to have something around it that keeps everything
It's a really good
working
analogy. Actually.
when
It's
you're
a great
not
analogy.
there, right?
Yeah.
So that's an important kind of key. And I know, Brian, you've been in your time as a bigger business now, you're doing acquisitions, right? I'm sure you've had some, owners that had a little bit of pie in the sky here with what they thought their business was worth.
Well, it's not so much the pie in the sky with their business worth, because some people people I think like to. So here's the statistic that I was quoting. So I was a little off. So 20% of businesses will fail after the first year. 50% will fail after the first 5 years. So already that's pretty big when you think about it. So we're the other 50% right here in our
Yeah.
business. So what's crazy is that only 15 to 30% of small businesses are successful and sold. So it means of those
Uh,
businesses, like again, so that's the difference. So if you think about it, it's only like man, 85% of businesses will like basically never be sold. So when you think about that, again, that considers not just failure rate, but also people can do a really good job of not selling their business and making great money, right? So
yeah.
essentially to answer your question, right, in that way is we talk with people and the businesses that we've acquired and joined in, a lot of it, there's a lot of really good positives to selling part of your business for, like, for instance, I'll give you a great analogy that I thought of. If I had, 10% of Amazon, that'd be worth a lot more to me than 100% of a practice out of the back of my car, right? Like that would make a
Mhm.
lot of sense. So
Yeah.
when you think about that concept, like you nailed it with that roof analogy. I remember when I was first starting my business and I was like looking for a book of business and building, somebody approached me and they were like, "Hey, well, this guy wants to sell his business. Would you be interested in buying his business?" And I was like, well, maybe, but like I don't, I also don't know. Like I would be kind of buying the book of business, and like I remember offering him like, you know, 10 grand. And now I look back on it, and even that would be dicey, right?
Mhm.
Because the reality of that is it's not really worth the risk for me to go do that. Now, if someone's starting brand spanking new and created that, to your point, and there was a better handoff, like I think 10 grand might be worth it. But to your point about EBITDA, like the difference on numbers, like this business is very, it depends on how you want to look at the business. Do you
Mhm.
want to make an asset out of the business that you sell one day? Or do you want to think about it as being a cash flow business that you make more money? And I think
Yep.
the difference being is if you want to make it a cash flow business, you want to start that basically from day one, and as you're building that business, then essentially you can start taking more money quicker from the business. And that's something you can start
Yeah.
paying yourself and making more money. And very quickly you can make more money than, probably after a couple of years, you'd be making more money than you would if you were working for somebody else. Right.
Yeah, so to give
Um,
you an example,
yeah.
like that's where I'm at with mine. So longtime listeners know that I had corporate experience and building and scaling clinics, but really I just started a practice out of the back of my car a year ago, and I've made more money this year than I've ever made, right? Because it's
Yeah.
essentially a cash flow business. But before I started, I got two kids in preschool, man. Like
Yeah.
I don't live in a cheap area, right? We're not Fairfield, Connecticut over here, but still, I mean, Phoenix, Scottsdale. Um,
Yeah.
and so for me, it's a cash flow business, but right now I'm taking steps to make it scalable, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important topic for anybody to listen to this is like, what are some of the big first steps you might take to scale, and then go on down that road of like why you are happy you did it, right? Or why it's you wish you did it, right? When you're at your level. Because people will be listening all the way from my level of like, I just started a business, all the way up to I want to have 3, 4, 5 more clinics. So I know for me, like I just got off a call about my first EMR system. right? And something that I can build within a system versus just, doing notes and doing it on the calendar app and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I've also, been looking into SEO and building my website because I know that's like a longer play and that'll make it more of an asset going forward.
Yeah.
But like, what are some of the things that you think are pretty important at the new stage, and then why are they important going forward?
I think the key, is so this is a great example that I've had with my wife and some of the practices that we work with, and particularly I would talk with this about any other practice in that way. You got to also think about what you want out of your business or your profession, right? And
Mhm.
so something that I think has made me successful in doing what we're doing with evolution is the fact that I actually did start out of my car and leverage the fact that I understood certain skill sets earlier on how to build and grow a business from nothing, right? So learning how to market, learning how to, network, looking how to create relationships, that kind of thing,
Mhm.
right? I think that I've also learned that those are different skill sets than when you're scaling.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I think there's an advantageous aspect to is you're starting to really build a business, starting to make more money, is also like, does that make you happy? Right.
Yeah.
And is it something where you want to change to a different degree? I knew for me what I wanted to do was I was young. I was like 30 when we talked about I started the business at 28 and I was
Yeah.
30 and I was like, you know what? I kind of want to take a big shot when like my
Yeah.
business partner called me, right? Mike called me. I'm like, and no Owen knows my partner, and we were chatting. He was like, "This is my idea. This is what we want to do. We want to go big." And I was like, "Cool, I'm in. Like, let's go for it." Worst case scenario, I got to start all over again. And in my mind, what was kind of cool was I was like, if that happens, I have the skills to start again on my own if I have to, right? If I
Mhm.
got to do that, it would suck. I'd have to pick up pieces. You're probably declaring bankruptcy, all the things. It's probably terrible, right? But nevertheless, like at that time, maybe I was naive, but at that time I was like, I think it's worth a shot to like really go big, right? And I look back on it now, and and that was really my main motivator. Was I was like, life's too short not to give it a shot, right? Lawrence.
Mhm.
That being said, could I have continued doing what I was doing and been totally happy? Absolutely. Am I doing what I'm doing now and totally happy? Absolutely. So I think the thing I would say to people, particularly physical therapists that are thinking about that, think about your happiness first. That's the whole friggin' point of why you're doing this
Yeah.
stuff. If you're like, and I think one of the things that I've talked about with a business owner who they were basically trying to build a business to a point where they were almost putting themselves, like taking themselves out of the business, and then as I watched them, one of the things I was seeing, I was like, you don't seem happy though with this. Like
Yeah.
all the biggest headaches of like, there's headaches with that, right? Employees and other things like that were driving them crazy. And I
Mhm.
was like, so you got kind of two choices. You can keep bulldozing ahead. And by the way, wasn't making more
Mhm.
money to the point where like it was worth it, right?
Yeah.
So basically they were like, well, let me take a step back and go back to doing what I was doing just by myself, going that solopreneur. They are so happy. They're making way more money. They have way
Mhm.
less headaches. And they were like, I'm just going to build my brand and crush it on me. And it's like, that's fine. That works
Good.
too. Right. Because
Yeah.
then what you can do is you can put money away. And guess what? That's an asset now you're creating.
Yeah.
So
There
you
you
just
go.
have to
Stock
think about a
market.
different vehicle.
Yeah.
So the answer I would say, Owen, I think the biggest thing is understand what you're wanting to do from a happiness perspective. And I know that sounds kind of hokey, but the
Mhm.
reality is like, I think either one can be super successful if you develop the right skills. The other thing I would think about is develop the skills that coincide with where you want to go. So if I'm happy being a solopreneur, doing my own thing, like we were just talking to somebody who they're booked out through next June already. They're already scheduled out for next June. And that
Yeah.
person seems to be super happy. And the way they said it was originally was my practice is perfect the way it is. And I was
Mhm.
like, it's perfect the way it is for you. It may not be perfect the way it is for me. Like, I don't know if necessarily know if I want to be committed through June of next year, right?
Yeah.
That way. Like that to me
Yeah.
seems intense. I would want to hire two other people, and then that way, then I know that I have flexibility to like go on vacation or go do something with my kids, right? But like
Mhm.
in this person's world, they were like, I love the idea of complete stability that I have. I'm booked out until next June. It's
Yeah.
like, okay,
And
cool.
I think that's honestly, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Is that we see, I mean, we could talk about either classmates or colleagues that we've worked in at different jobs and things like that. And, you kind of understand some people, man, they will show up at 6 a.m., no matter what. If you pay them $2 or if you pay them 200, they
Exactly.
just really care about like building something, right?
Yeah.
And then you have others that obviously, rightly so, will say, look, I have a lot of value and I really like my value and I want to make my value more. And I'm cool with not having a boss and not doing that. So I think that is honestly the number one answer. There's no, I mean, yeah, you could go to like the EMR stuff and things that I'm thinking, but then if I like track back on that when I was saying those things, all of that makes sense to me because in my head, scale or die, right? Because that's what
Yeah.
I'm used to, right? That's where I got my my satisfaction with my job in my previous jobs, right? But so as I'm doing that, it's really I think that's massively important is to understand that, you know, it's not going to be awesome if you don't like it at the end, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to build somebody else's dream.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, and I will tell you, like as I've been doing this and growing this business, I have some really key people that I'm working that work for me and are huge in creating leadership. But to get to that point where I had those people, that was the grind. And like I would say that if you're creating an asset business like we're doing Evolution, the grind is a little bit longer, right? It's just the
Hmm.
length of time. Whereas I
Yeah.
do feel like with an asset business, I feel like you and I chatting and talking about this podcast, you can get to pretty good money pretty quickly. I feel like
Yeah.
if you have the right mind, if you have the right mindset, you have the right hustle, you have the right tutelage. Like again, here's that type of, we're leading into one of our reads already, is essentially if you can learn the skills really quickly and create the following really quickly, you can make money in this as a solopreneur very quickly. So it doesn't have to be painful. Go ahead, do
And
it.
if your PT career deserves more than just surviving, it's time to thrive. Physio Growth gives you the roadmap to financial success and practice growth. Join us at school.com/physiogrowth mentorship group. Man, who writes these, huh?
Crushed it.
Well, and when you say that, I think it's interesting because I literally just checked out a LinkedIn post right before I got into this podcast. And this guy was saying, he's like, I struggled. And then I figured out some mastermind groups. I read some books, I brought in my wife on something. And now, 5 years later, I'm killing it. Right.
Yeah.
And I thought, if nothing else, that speaks. And this guy wasn't selling, a mastermind group or whatever. He was just saying, look, I didn't have the information. I needed the information. Like once I got it, I figured it out. And his whole thing was, young business owners, it's okay. You'll get there. Right. Persist. But this is kind of, why we do it. Right. And this is also the reason why we don't charge, $10,000 just to get on a call with us or whatever, or
Yeah.
some program that's like something we record in our basement and then send it out to the world. Like we want to problem solve with you. Like I love this stuff, right?
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
we love working with people and growing their business. So, learn from our mistakes is essentially it.
I think the biggest thing about the way we structured Physio Growth, like I got a call from somebody. We're doing a call, and they were asking me about pro contracts and how to set up a pro contract and do that. And I was like, that's impossible for me to do in 30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Or even set up a specific digital program for that. Like that's something we
Yeah.
got to be ongoing, and like I can kind of coach you through, right,
Yeah.
in that way. And
Well, we
so
have
that's
one in
really
the
set
group
up.
right now, hiring process,
Yeah,
right? And it's
exactly.
multiple calls over weeks because first stage is how do I get more people? Then stage is this, and then and well, I mean, she's on her offer letter within 2 weeks, so I think we're pretty good at this. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that there's these structured things that like you said, if I could answer it in half an hour, you know,
Totally,
everybody
man.
would be beating down my door.
Exactly, and I think something I was thinking about before when we were talking about this part where you're like kind of what you're saying with the person who was like, oh, I'm trying to sell my business. Someone's like, it's kind of worth nothing, right? It's like
Yeah.
it would be worth getting in these groups and someone telling you that way earlier than when you're actually
Yeah.
like 20 years into that thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the
Like,
problem, right?
this is what
So
you're trending towards if you make these decisions, right?
the good news about our profession, honestly, that I didn't realize, that I think we've talked about when we were in a Paul Singh episode, everybody's watching that one, is
Yeah.
that because you don't need to create a market or demand, it's actually quite
Yeah.
easy to start a physical therapy business,
It
right?
is, yeah. Everybody's a genius in a bull market, right? Right now,
Exactly.
there's so few PTs out there. So many people
Yes.
need it. The product in the insurance side is getting worse every year, for cash people at least, right?
Yeah.
And then that's why you built off your cash side with your fitness. And I mean, yeah, I could go on a million years on this topic, but
Yeah.
essentially, a lot of people think they're very, very smart at business because they're making money when really they're
Yeah.
riding the wave. So I'm not going to be one of these guys that says, well, doomsday is coming and all that. But like, you got to know, what's coming down the pike. So,
Huh.
I always say we started our business in the Great Recession,
Well, then that's the
or we
first thing
started
that
our things in the
that's
Great Recession.
exactly, that's the first thing that I say when I was thinking about that. When you said that, dude, like about that person who was like, "Oh, I'm looking to sell my business," but then I said the same thing. Like at the end, they're like, "Oh, they're looking to sell their business." I'm like, their business isn't worth anything. And when
Yeah.
somebody's like, "Oh, wait a minute, that person still had a successful business they were getting paid for,"
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
crazy. Now, hopefully they,
Yeah.
in my opinion, hopefully they were socking away money to the point where they got, X amount of dollars in the bank or in the
Yeah.
stock market and they got an asset that way. But
They
yeah, I
built
mean,
their money in real time versus waiting for it at the end. Yeah.
exactly. Because I think that's one of those things where if you think about if you're looking to, create an asset, the
Hmm.
idea is actually no, you need to put as much money into the business as possible and take as little as possible in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then get to a point where it starts to snowball and you're looking for that snowball effect over time.
Yeah.
So it really is about what you're trying to do. And by the way, you can pivot that anytime, right? You can change that
Yeah.
around if you want to or move it around. So no, I think that's an interesting piece of that, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the part that's a challenge.
Yeah. And that's that. I think when we're talking about scaling, right, and when we're talking about what you want to do, you don't have to have an answer right away, right?
Yeah.
But you should have somewhat of an idea, right? Because it's gonna, decisions you make in the early stages are gonna affect the end, right? Now it's okay if you pivot, right? But just remember that if you pivot, it's different, right? You can't just wake up one day and be like, you know what, I want to scale. I think I would like 4 businesses. Like, you're going to have to make a life change doing that, right? So it's a big thing. It's something we talk about in our group, obviously, and something that hopefully,
You
if
know,
anybody's consider this podcast has helped.
Yeah, I agree. And one kind of thing to put an end on that was I met with somebody at this meeting today that I was at this networking meeting, and they were talking about, oh, I'm here to see if I can buy a business. I'm looking to buy a business. And in
Yeah.
my head, the first red flag I hear with that is I'm like, I hope this guy, like, one of the things that I would encourage anybody if they're doing that, what you were just talking about, is learn the pieces about the business around the business, right? Like if I
Mhm.
just bought a random business that was a strong business, I could also tank that bad boy into the ground. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because the reality is, if I don't understand the business, like if I bought a thriving HVAC business or plumbing business or you know real estate business, and I don't understand that business, right?
Yeah.
I could be in a ton of trouble. Mark Cuban was just talking about, I was heard on a podcast, like why did he sell the Mavericks, right? And he was saying, he was like, where I was and where I was going, he was like, I didn't want to leave it to my kids in the family business.
Hmm.
That responsibility, it wasn't something I think they wanted to do. And two was, the next step for me as an owner was to kind of do like some land development around the arena and kind of build that stuff. And like, that's another way you can make more money. And I just didn't want to do that. That's not my world. That's not my business. So I just ended up selling it. Right. And
Yeah.
so he's made a massive, massive product that he then could sell for a ton of money and killed it. And some people might be like, why did you hold on to it? Why didn't you keep growing it? There's also a time to exit too. So
Yeah.
I think when it comes down to, these aspects, it's important to also understand, you know the business you're in, know what your strategy is, start making from almost day one that you understand where you want to go, start making those decisions towards that. And so I think,
Yeah.
Owen, if you're dreaming of a thriving PT practice, Physiogrowth helps physical therapists like you achieve financial freedom and long-term success. Get started at school.com/physiogrowth-mentorship-group.
There you go. All
Good
right.
stuff.
And with that, as always, we remind everybody to check us out. And obviously, Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube. You can get us on all the wherever sweet hot podcasts are sold. And with that, Brian, I'm out, man. I will see you. Have a good Thursday.
Sounds good, baby. Later.
See ya.